No time off for our next guest, though. Although I will say this. I'll start by saying this.
You got him working overtime.
No. Johnny Mac, you may have tomorrow off.
Wow.
At least for my show. Because at 10 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning, I mean, some of the cuts are coming out now.
Yeah, they've already started. I would imagine most of them will come out tomorrow, but it's a lot of people that got to go, 90 to 53. So
right, Jeremiah McKinnon came out first, and then they're starting to trickle out here. The one thing I want to get into first and foremost is the Scandrick announcement came out most recently or fairly recently, and the words vested veteran in there perked up my ears because I'm thinking, that's exactly what John McMullen's been telling me all week, that these vested veterans are guys they might try to play the shell game with and bring back.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you have to do when you have all these injuries. And I mentioned he was a likely candidate because Cre'Von LeBlanc is hurt, not going to be ready for week one, but it's not. The Eagles don't feel it's significant, don't feel he's going to miss a ton of time, and they could carry him on the 53. In fact, I think this is a good indication they probably are going to carry him on the 53. And then you have to start thinking about once he's there, you can put him on injured reserve, and then he's designated to return. And if Lando Scandrick is still out there in week 2, you can bring him back, and you don't have to guarantee his entire salary. So that's what vested veterans, if they're on the roster week 1, you guarantee their entire salary for week 17. So guys like him and Jonathan Cyprien as well, even a Stefan Wisniewski, they could all be in that type of category.
Yeah, I'll definitely be keeping an eye out on Wisniewski because, you know, you and I have had several discussions about how we feel about Wisniewski versus how the Eagles feel about Wisniewski, or maybe Jeff Stoutland feels about Wisniewski. You know, will he make it? Will he not make it? 4 o'clock tomorrow for sure. We'll know everybody, but they are starting to leak out. For example, a Rutgers wide receiver, right? Carlton. Does that mean we can't do the Carlton dance now?
Yeah, Carlton Agudosi, he was an interesting story because he's so big, 6'6", so he was one of those camp guys that everybody kind of opens their eyes at. But his ceiling was always probably the practice squad, and I think there's a good chance that he'll be brought back after he clears waivers. Kevin Wilkins, another Rutgers product, a defensive tackle. He's been waived. Anthony Fabiano, who's an offensive lineman. No surprises to this point, other than a lot of people thought Scandrick would get carried because of the injuries at the cornerback position. Not only LeBlanc, but also remember Jalen Mills is going to likely start on the PUP list. So all of a sudden, what looked like a deep position isn't very deep, and that kind of always happens, it seems, at cornerback in the NFL.
All right, so the preseason's officially over, John, and it felt like this summer it went a little bit longer than it typically feels like. And, you know, now we can look back a little bit on training camp and, you know, the 4 preseason games and shift our focus to week 1. But what did we learn this summer, just if anything at all? You know, how valuable were the preseason games for someone like you, for the organization? And did anyone stick out? Is there any surprising storylines? Just kind of give me and the listeners an overall recap of the summer that was.
You know my thought process.
I know, but I want to hear it one more time.
The games themselves haven't meant much at all. And I think even less this season than most years, because part of it is that if you go back to that Jacksonville game where Cody Kessler got injured a few plays into it, and you had to play Clayton Thorson the entire game, and they played Thorson again the entire game. So in week 4, and he's just not ready. So you can't do anything offensively. You can't really work on what you want to work on. So the Eagles did all of that sort of behind the curtain and practice, and that's where the first team players have gotten a significant amount of reps, and that's where they've done their preparation. And we'll see how it works. I mean, it's definitely a change. It's definitely a shift. They had been, you know, the entire league, we've talked about it a lot, is trending towards not playing your starters in the preseason games as much, at least in the past. The Eagles had been if you're going to say 50-50, they would probably have leaned more old school before this year, and now they've gone to new school. They shut everybody down, basically, if anything was wrong with them, and they saw no value in the preseason games, and we're going to see if it matters. And I do not think it's going to matter.
So is Deshawn Hall the preseason value test? Because he played about as good as anyone could play in 4 preseason games, as far as someone in his standing.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I got through the game, by cracking Deshawn Hall jokes on Twitter last night. That's the only enjoyment I got. I mean, he's been tremendous, and I said that a couple weeks ago. He is the ultimate litmus test. If he doesn't make this team, the preseason means absolutely nothing. Now, I do think he's going to make the team. In fact, he deserves to be the 4th defensive end. He is past Josh Sweat. He's certainly above Sharif Miller. I think the Eagles are going to go heavy at that position because they don't want to cut draft picks that early in their careers. But he deserves to play, and he's played well, and he should be rewarded for it. But if for some reason the Eagles throw us a curveball, they told you what they think. That's basically a big middle finger to preseason games if they don't keep him.
It already feels like the league collectively, not from the office standpoint, but head coaches and organizations around the league, it kind of felt like last night, John, that they already gave that that middle finger, because last night was, I don't know, not that I have this great memory and track record of years past 4th preseason games, but last night felt just extra horrible. Like I'd rather watch paint dry. Like every coach was just saying, let's get out of here as quick as possible.
Well, I mean, week 4 has always been like that, so that part of it hasn't changed that much. I mean, that's been going on for years where nobody plays anybody in the final preseason game. So I don't necessarily think that's changed, but I do think you look at a market like New York and North Jersey, and there's nobody in that building. I can't believe the NFL is happy with this, slapping that shield, and you know, we get 1,000 press releases every week about the popularity of this game. It is extremely popular, but there was less than 10,000 people in that stadium last night. And I might be being kind. And that's not a good look for the NFL. And we've already heard Roger Goodell say, giving up the fight, so to speak, and he even admits you got to cut it down, and we'll see how that happens in the next CBA. And the Sporting News today actually wrote an obituary for the NFL preseason, so it's definitely bad. But I will say this: it was probably worse for Philadelphia because of Clayton Thorson. He was just so abysmally bad at quarterback. So if you look at the Jets last night, for instance, they started Trevor Siemian, who's a legitimate backup in this league and has experience, a significant experience as a starter in Denver. He was pretty good. And you see some of these other teams that have legitimate backup quarterbacks or competent quarterbacks, and they can do some things. So I think it was especially ugly for Philadelphia because Clayton Thorson was playing so much, and he's just not good enough. And this, we talked about a litmus test with Deshawn Hall. This is a litmus test for Howie Roseman. I mean, you got to cut that kid. And I don't like calling for anybody's job, but there is no way he belongs on this football team. Now, I don't think he's going to make the 53, but even if you bring him back to the practice squad, you're insulting somebody else, and you're just doing it for ego's sake. That's how bad he's been, and it's not just the preseason games. It's in practice. I mean, behind the curtain, he's been consistently bad, and he's just not ready. The Eagles made a mistake, and you have to admit that, and you got to put the ego aside, and that's what good teams do.
John McMullen's with us, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles Insider. Now, John, earlier in the show, I asked Ryan, I watched a little post game last night. I actually just happened to switch back and see what were some of the things they were highlighting in a post-game show of a game that, as you said, quite frankly, was not very entertaining. And Amy Fadul played a little game there and tried to trip up Seth Joyner to see if he could name, because the Jets and the Eagles play each other almost all the time in the
every
preseason finale, right? So
a tradition like no other.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's the Masters and Eagles Jets Game 4 preseason.
Right. I've called it schlock. Josh would call it dreck. Let me ask this, though. Let me see if you get it right, because I asked Ryan, and he struggled, but Ray Didinger got it, so I got faith in you, John. Who were the two quarterbacks last year in this preseason finale
starters
game? Who were the two starting quarterbacks last year?
That's a tough one. I try, I think it's like a drunken haze. I try to forget. Did Christian Hackenberg start?
There's one half.
Yeah, and from the Jets' perspective, I don't know. I do not recall. So I'm gonna tap out on that one. But I know we talk about a tradition like any other. I think that's the first Jets-Eagles preseason game since 2015, maybe, without Christian Hackenberg.
I probably failed to say like the two quarterbacks, because Hackenberg started last year for who?
Well, for the Eagles. No, for the Jets. I'm sorry.
For the Jets.
Yeah.
So
2 years ago, Hackenberg was on the Eagles camp. It was in the Eagles camp, though, was he not?
Yes, he was in the Eagles camp last year.
No, you got that. I think flip-flopped, right? PT, didn't you say that Joey Callahan was the Eagles starting quarterback last year?
I thought Joe Callahan was the starter.
And you said Hackenberg was the Jets. If you end up being wrong in all of this will make my year.
They were both Joe and Christian were here last year at some point.
So maybe the question was, who were the two Eagles quarterbacks that played last year in the game?
Yeah,
hey, I was half, last night while I watched that go by. I just remembered there's no way.
The first thing you do after watching one of these games is you go looking for the men in black to erase your memory.
Yes, yes.
I try to do that as quickly as possible.
All right. Well, I botched the question, and now Ryan's going to beat me up at the commercial break. But listen, I'm not going to botch the fact that some jobs might have been won last night, and you write on our website, like, he may not have won the job, but he certainly made his case, and that's Alex Singleton.
Yeah, I want to clarify that, and I tweeted before the game, and I fully believe this. Nobody won a job in that game. I suppose you could have lost one if you play as bad as Thorson, for instance, but I don't think he had a job anyway. Alex Singleton is one of those guys who's been consistently good throughout camp and practice and the games as well. And he's one of those guys that probably deserves. There's two players I point to. Greg Ward is one, and Alex is the second, who deserve to make this team. And I don't necessarily know if they're going to. And there's a lot of reasons. And that old cliche, the best 53, nobody takes the best 53. They put the best fit together to put together a team, and sometimes you don't keep the best player. Matt Collins versus Greg Ward is a perfect example. I don't know if you can keep six linebackers, and that will hurt Alex Singleton.
John McMullen's with us. So a couple of names are starting to leak out, and you get names like sent to you. No, you're also following it, right? I mean, how do you handle this next 12 to 24 hours? Is my question.
As you know, agents tend to leak out names when they're made aware that their guys have been waived.
All right.
Remember, the vast majority we already know are going to be waived, so it's just a matter of when you're made aware of it. Guys like we just mentioned, Kevin Wilkins, Anthony Fabiano, they were not in the mix to be on this roster. So it's basically when the agent informs you. So that's how all of that kind of goes down.
John, how many – I've asked you this throughout the entire summer, but, following up on PT's question, how many spots are you unsure of right now?
Well, I wrote yesterday I'm a little more unsure than usual, believe it or not, even though this team is so deep, and it's because of the injuries. So it has more to do with the injuries.
Right.
And understand in the preseason, the Eagles don't have to be as above board from an injury standpoint as they do during the season. And even during the season, they're very murky, but they have no obligation to inform you of the seriousness of these injuries. So you have to kind of figure it out on your own. Cre'Von LeBlanc, as I said, is indicated that he's going to be ready long before 8 weeks, which would be the IR designated to return. So you got to weigh, do you carry him on the roster? Same with Richard Rodgers. We don't really know how serious that injury is. If he's healthy, if he's going to be healthy relatively early in the season, he's going to make this team. So it makes it more difficult to figure out who's going to be there. Even Jordan Mailata, who's had a back injury dating back to last season. Now, if he's healthy, if he's ready to go, he's going to be on the roster. But obviously, if he's hurt and it's more significant than is being led on, it's a candidate for injured reserve that knocks somebody up. So the Eagles have so many. And remember, we haven't even talked about the really good players that you have to carry. Nigel Bradham or key contributors, Camus, Grugier, Hill. You have to carry those guys. So all the injuries have made it far murkier this time around.
Yeah, we'll see how this plays out as the Eagles cut down to their 53-man roster heading into Week 1 against the Washington Redskins. John, I want to transition to a big story in the NFC East. I don't know if you saw this or not, but Ezekiel Elliott here, he's nowhere to be found. So
yeah, didn't Jerry call him Zach or something?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Jerry is playing good cop, bad cop. It's like he's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. One day he says ZQ, the next day he says we're BFFs and that's what we do. So what are your thoughts on all of this? When is he going to have a helmet on and be out on the field in the regular season, if at all?
Well, I'll say it's good news for the Eagles because this is a two-horse race, and that's the other horse in the race. And if they don't have Ezekiel Elliott, they're not in the race. I mean, they're just not the same team. So obviously, we're just over a week from the regular season. Even if he comes in today, he's probably not going to be completely ready to handle his usual workload at the beginning of the season. So the longer it moves on, the longer they're at loggerheads, the better it is for the Eagles. I think the Cowboys, I understand from their standpoint, they don't want to create the precedent because he essentially has a lot of time left on his original contract. So that's their issue. But hey, you got to realize, man, this is what your offense runs on, and if you don't have them, it's going to look pretty ugly. And I think that might be the ultimate end game. The fact that the Cowboys have to start this season without Ezekiel Elliott, they're going to find out really quickly that offense isn't very good, and that's going to spur action. And he's going to come in. But that helps the Eagles because whenever he does come in, he's going to need a little bit of time to ramp up.
So, John, I saw you retweet something earlier today, and I believe it was from Ross Tucker, former NFL player. Now he's in the media doing various things. But basically his tweet was, several guys appear to be ready to miss games and the paychecks that go along with it, and I just don't get it. Unless they are sure it will lead to a new contract that makes up for it. Basically he's saying, what are these guys doing? I mean, you would think that Zeke would have learned something from Le'Veon Bell. Like, what should we expect from these guys, particularly high-profile running backs seeking that payday moving forward?
Yeah, you would think they would learn something, but, some have tried to – we live in a weird time because people bend over backwards to try to make people feel better. And if you're just looking at from a common sense perspective, Le'Veon Bell lost a lot of money. I mean, if you want to, great. If that's your goal, if he hated being in Pittsburgh so much and he was willing to give up money to get his goal, that's certainly his right. But to frame it any other way, that he left a lot of money on the table is just lying to people. And sometimes I think players believe when they're being lied to be honest. And we see it all the time. I mean, I've had it with Carli Lloyd. You guys saw the 55-yard field goal she made at Eagles camp?
Yep.
And I tweeted out, she could probably kick a football better than 99% of the men in the world. It is not an insult to say she cannot compete with the 32 best kickers in the NFL at 37 years old, starting at 37 years old. That's just common sense. It's not an insult. But that's where we are in life.
And how did that tweet go over?
It did not.
Like a lead balloon.
Yeah, this is a high-level athlete, that people would say. And I said, I know. The two things aren't mutually exclusive. Remember, who was a pretty good athlete you might have heard of? Michael Jordan. At 30
I've heard of him.
years old, tried to switch sports. How did that work for him?
But I'll play devil's advocate, John, and just say, well, the Carli Lloyd transition is much more smooth in the fact that obviously, my high school team had a soccer player kicking 40-yard field goals. Most soccer players do transition to that position. So if Carli Lloyd is an elite soccer player.
Well, plenty of soccer players have, but why haven't any men done it at age 37?
Yeah.
Again, point to me one person in the history of the NFL, doesn't matter gender, that started at 37 years old and got to the NFL. One. Give me one.
I can't. That's an uphill battle.
It's absurd. And it's not an insult. That's the part that gets me. She's a phenomenal athlete. She's a great kicker. She can certainly kick better than all of us, or, as I said, 99% of the men. To say she can compete with Justin Tucker and people at that level, you're an idiot.
But
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's beautiful. We should end on that. But I want to say this, John. You want to get people to watch preseason games, put Carli Lloyd out on the field for
that. I agree with.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, hey, if you want to do it to sell tickets,
right,
and get more than 10,000 people in the building, knock yourself out. If she wants to try it, go ahead. That's fine. But you have people legitimately believing because they want likes on social media and they want to be liked, that just put common sense to the side. And I'm sorry. I don't lie to people. That's like my one credo.
And that's why we love you, John McMullen, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles Insider. Johnny, I was going to give you the weekend off, and then I started thinking, wait a minute, but I don't have a guest at 8:40 tomorrow.
Oh, man.
What do you think,
Stop
John?
it.
Should I give you the weekend off, or do you want to join me on the show tomorrow? I'm putting you on the spot.
It's up to you, Pete. I got to be up anyway because I got to deal with all these cuts. So if you need me, I'm there for you.
All right,
only you, Pete.
I'll send you a text later, and we'll lock it in, as they say. But it's going to be me waking you up to start, then I'll just keep my distance because, I don't want you or the dog barking at me.
I'm always up. The dog will bark at you, though.
All right, buddy. Well, now that we've called everybody an idiot, the segment's coming to an end. So,
influencing people. People love me.
Yeah, nothing but smiles for Johnny Mac. All right, pal. We appreciate it, and we'll catch up with you soon.
All right, see you guys.